There was a woodcutter who was hired by a timber merchant to work in a large forest. He was a strong man, a motivated man, the kind of person who takes pride in his output and measures his worth by the quality and quantity of what he produces by the end of each day. On his first day, he arrived early, before sunrise, and worked until the light failed. He cut 15 trees. It was excellent work, and the timber merchant told him so directly. "Keep this up," the merchant said, "and you will be the best worker I have ever had." The woodcutter went home determined to do better. He arrived even earlier the next day. He pushed through his breaks. He ate without sitting down. He was not going to produce less than 15. He was going to produce more. He cut 12 trees. He was confused. He had worked harder than the day before, objectively. More hours, more effort, more determination, and he had produced less. He told himself it was a temporary variation, an off day. He would compensate. The next day he arrived before the sun was even thinking about rising. He brought his food to eat in the forest so he could eat between trees without wasting time. He did not stop for water when his body asked for it. He pushed through the parts of the afternoon when his arms were burning and most people would have paused. He cut 9 trees, then 7, then 5. He sat at the edge of the forest on the 5th day and looked at his hands and tried to understand what was happening. He was not ill. He had not been injured. His strength was, if anything, greater from all the recent work. He was going to bed earlier. He was eating properly. He was more experienced with the terrain and the trees than he had been on day 1. And yet, he was producing a third of what he had produced on day 1. He went to the timber merchant. He explained everything: the numbers, the effort, the hours, the fact that every reasonable variable was moving in the right direction and the output was going in the opposite one. The merchant looked at him carefully. "When," the merchant asked, "did you last sharpen your axe?" The woodcutter looked at him. "Sharpen my axe," he said. "Since you started," the merchant said. "Have you sharpened it at all since your first morning?" The woodcutter thought. He thought about every day since the beginning, the early mornings, the long hours, the focus on the trees, on the numbers, on the output. "No," he said quietly. "I have not had time. I have been too busy cutting." The merchant said nothing. He let the silence do the work. The woodcutter walked back into the forest alone. He sat down and looked at his axe, really looked at it. The blade that had been sharp and precise on that first morning was now dull and battered and chipped in places. It was not an axe anymore in the full sense of the word. It was a heavy piece of metal being applied to trees through sheer force. Every tree he had cut in the last few days had been cut not with an axe, but with persistence, with pure stubbornness, with the refusal to stop working while the tool he was working with had quietly become unsuitable for the task. He had been swinging harder and harder to compensate for a blade that was no longer sharp enough to do what it was designed to do. And he had called this working hard. He spent an hour sharpening. 1 hour of what felt, in the economy of his recent days, like an almost decadent pause, a luxury, time spent not producing. That afternoon he went back into the forest and cut 18 trees, his best day yet, using less effort than he had used on any of the brutal, exhausting, increasingly unproductive days that had come before. He sat at the edge of the forest that evening in the last of the light and felt something clarify in him. He thought about the axe, and then he thought about everything else in his life that might have a blade that needed sharpening. His mind. When had he last given it genuine rest rather than passive distraction? There is a difference between lying on a bed looking at a screen and actually resting a mind that has been working hard. He could not remember the last time he had done the second one. His attention. When had he last sat with a person he cared about without part of his mind running through the list of things he needed to do? When had he last had a conversation that was fully received rather than half processed? His creativity. When had he last done anything for no reason, for the pleasure of it, without needing it to produce something? He could not remember. All of these were blades. All of them had been put to work. None of them had been sharpened in longer than he could precisely calculate. And he had been calling this dedication. He went home and he slept differently that night. Not longer, but better. Because he understood something he had not understood when he woke up that morning. The sharpening is not the interruption to the work. The sharpening is what makes the work possible. Here is what this story is really about. We live in a world that treats busyness as a virtue, that equates exhaustion with commitment, that looks at the person who never stops and calls them admirable. And there is real value in consistent effort. The woodcutter's work ethic was genuine and it mattered. But effort without maintenance is not sustainable. It is not even effective beyond a certain point. The axe that is swung harder and harder without being sharpened does not cut better. It just destroys the person swinging it faster. The question this story asks is not whether you are working hard. You are. Most people genuinely are. The question is, what is the state of your axe? If you do your most important work with your mind, when did you last genuinely rest it? Not distract it, rest it. When did you last be in silence without filling the silence? When did you last sleep without a screen being the last thing you looked at? If you do your most important work with your relationships, when did you last invest in one with no agenda? When did you last show up for someone not because you needed something, but simply because they needed you there? If you work with your creativity, when did you last make something with no intention of showing anyone? These things feel in a busy life like luxuries, like the things you will get to when the important work is done. But the sharpening is the important work. Without it, everything else gets progressively harder and progressively less effective, while you work progressively harder to compensate. When did you last sharpen your axe? Not the one in your garage, the one you actually use, every day, for the work that actually matters. If you cannot remember, that is your answer. Tomorrow, before you pick up the axe and start swinging, spend 1 hour making it sharp. The trees will not go anywhere.